So, Butch Hartman is relevant again, and I bet at this point you're just as tired of hearing about this as I am. Yeah, apparently they're going to be making a live-action Fairly OddParents series, and Butch is going to be involved with it. What did you think I was going to talk about? That he was caught tracing another commission and appears to be a con man? I've actually been relatively silent on the whole Butch Hartman thing, at least compared to Alpha J, LS Mark, Pie Guy Rules, a lot of people really. But it's not like I've never had something to say about Elmer and the many things that he's done since his departure from Nickelodeon. The most infamous thing that he did was he ran a Kickstarter for a streaming service, Oaxis. Now, if you're new here and to me, back in 2018, I was also running a crowdfunding campaign. I was all set to do this. I was preparing for a month in advance. And then 2 weeks before we were ready to go live, Butch Hartman shows off his Kickstarter for his streaming service. It was an awkward moment. Obviously, I didn't want to say anything at the time. I could have criticized and attacked it, but I feel that would have just left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, and it would appear to be just for drama. But yes, even at the time, I thought his Kickstarter campaign was quite bad. As someone who was doing research to do his own campaign, Butch made just about every single mistake that you could make along the way in making a Kickstarter campaign. Not to say that I didn't make any mistakes at all, I clearly made plenty of mistakes. For instance, having a unique name is quite important. Say what you want about it, but growing around is my thing, and it is only my thing. Oaxis is something that already existed before Butch ran his campaign. It's actually the name of a company that makes timepieces and thermometers. I don't know if not saying anything is something that I regret, but there is something that I wanted to vent about ever since this campaign. People said that I was asking for way too much money for one episode of a cartoon, which is probably true. However, at the same time, Butch was asking for less, but people thought that it was an accurate and okay number for an entire streaming service, which is absolutely ridiculous. In 2018 alone, Netflix spent $13 billion for its content, between both production and licensing. You've probably heard about all the things that he's done in his Kickstarter since then. You didn't need me specifically to speak up about it. He hid his intentions to make it religious, he wouldn't answer questions about if the service would include LGBT themes, and so on. He even did ridiculous things, like asking 100 people of his audience, mostly young people, to donate $99. It was a poorly run Kickstarter, and he never seemed to have a clue or a plan. One thing that hasn't gotten enough criticism or attention is that during all of this, he actually broke Kickstarter's rules. He offered to sell The Fairly OddParents, a show that had almost always been digital, in a raffle, as in one random donor would have gotten it. Because I actually did research on this for my own crowdfunding campaign, I knew that using a raffle system for Kickstarter prizes is directly against Kickstarter's terms of service. I knew it at the time, but because of my own campaign, I couldn't outwardly say it. So I told other people, and they talked about it, and it seemed that Elmer stepped backward on that one. Also, if you're wondering why I'm calling Butch Hartman Elmer, that is actually his real name. His real name is Elmer. 2018 was an eventful year, all things considered. And it seems like this guy has just been burning bridges ever since. You probably heard of all of the biggest stories to the point that they become more than rote. He joked about the suicide of Timmy Turner's original voice actress, claimed suicide wasn't even talked about when he was a kid, refused to pay Kuro the artist for his work, demonized critics, demonized introverts, and the aforementioned traced artworks for his commissions. As in, somebody paid him money, and then he took someone else's artwork, and he traced over it and sold it to other people. This is all not to mention his apparent lack of progress on Oaxis, something he collected $270,000 on. It's sad that I could all but definitively say that I've gotten further on my project than he did, when my crowdfunding campaign failed and his did not. I've done restructuring, been working on storyboards, reevaluating, and all of that. I've actually been doing work on this, getting further along. Meanwhile, the guy who gets the money has been giving out newsletters, and now asking for $50 million as an entry fee. And he's even going back to working with Nickelodeon. If you don't know, the speculation was that he left Nickelodeon to work on Oaxis. And it's very, very, very sad. For someone who claims to have created so many people's childhood, he doesn't seem to have much of a problem lying to children. For the record, I was always more of a Cartoon Network kid than Nickelodeon. But I did watch a lot of Fairly OddParents and a lot of Danny Phantom, before one was cancelled and the other should have been cancelled. Tough Puffy never interested me in the slightest, and I put Bunsen on my worst of the 2010s cartoons list for a reason, because it was just that annoying. I don't really respect Elmer as a creator. I watched all 4 of his shows in succession when I did Nicorama, and they all ended up running together. Every creator has their own thumbprint and their own style that tends to be inescapable. There are always some trends, and there are cliches that they use time and again. But with Butch Hartman brand shows, especially after the first 2 seasons of Danny Phantom, they all devolved into one homogeneous glob. The actual humor you'd find in Bunsen wasn't just the exact style of later Fairly OddParents. It had the same beats, the same punchlines, and the exact same rhythm. No story is unique to Bunsen or Tough Puppy. Any episode of Bunsen could have happened in later episodes of Fairly OddParents. And painting one with a spy coat of paint doesn't change what it is. Elmer puts on a very arrogant facade. And like his trademark name, it is a facade. It's hard to tell if he's so certain that he's the best cartoonist since Disney, or that he's certain that he's past his prime. But I do believe that he believes one or the other, even though I'm not inside his own head and I can't say that for certain. Trying to full on make a network definitely makes me feel like one of those 2 things is true. Either that or he's just not the smartest person in the world. One of the most fascinating things about watching the whole Butch Hartman downward spiral is from a religious point of view. Like, I don't know if I've ever said this on my channel, but I actually have a religious background. At the moment, I'm agnostic. I'd say an agnostic deist, which is basically believing in God, but not believing in any specific religion. After last year, I'm more inclined to believe that if a God does exist, we're all just a punchline, but I digress. I actually went to, a Catholic school until 7th grade. We actually had religious lessons every day, like math and English. My family definitely wasn't fundamentalist or anything, but we went to church on Sundays and holidays, and it was a force in our life. I've watched The Prince of Egypt and Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat more times than I can count. And let me tell you, when Butch says that he puts the gospel into his show, I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Because it certainly ain't the Judeo-Christian Bible. I mean, straight from the start, the Bible demonizes both the idea of ghosts, and it really, really hates magic. There are many, many passages that are strictly against magic and sorcery. It's why some fundamentalist groups protest Harry Potter. And it's why Butch backpedaled and said that many of the ghosts in Danny Phantom were just spirits that thought they were alive or something, even though many of them, like Poindexter, had established backstories and actual lives. But the excuses that Butch uses don't work if you actually read the Bible. It gets even more specific. There are a ton of passages that speak against necromancy specifically, and yet one of the episodes of Fairly OddParents has them reviving this dead pet in a form of necromancy. There's also a few passages about not lying to people and not stealing from people. Proverbs 19:9, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish. The Bible is very clear about this. Do not lie. Humility is often preached in the Bible, and claiming that you are a messenger of God, or whatever he's been doing, tends to be frowned upon. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. Proverbs 21:24. When people criticize Butch, they tend to be quick to say, this doesn't reflect my views on religion or Christianity, when a lot of what Butch has said or done in the past few years are directly against what comes from the Bible. I'm not exactly saying that he's a bad person who happens to be a Christian. I am saying that he is bad at being a Christian. And I'm not just talking about what he puts in his shows either. Protesting Harry Potter or whatever is stupid. God forbids people from doing sorcery in real life. As far as I can tell, he never cared if somebody wrote a fictional example of that. But shows like Fairly OddParents and Danny Phantom don't carry religious message in the slightest, no matter what Butch says on the matter. What he's been saying is a lie, and you'd know that if you knew anything about the Christian religion. Maybe they carry these religious values if you get so metaphorical to the point where only the writer knows what you meant. Maybe you could argue that Santa Claus is a metaphor for Jesus in this Christmas episode of this Christian show that doesn't mention Christ once. The Fairly OddParents episode Christmas Every Day, I'd imagine some religious people might have a problem with it if you argued that it was strictly a Bible teaching of some kind. And keep in mind, Nickelodeon did allow discussions of religion in their shows at the time. Being in a secular society isn't really an excuse for the Fairly OddParents not being overt. The Rugrats were Jewish, as was Harold from Hey Arnold, and there were episodes from each of those shows that delved into the Jewish culture and their religion. The Rugrats' Passover story is about the story of Moses. Usually born-again Christians are super religious, but as far as I can tell, Butch hasn't actually read the Bible since he converted. Because, if he had, I would assume that the lies would have stopped by now. And the theft. The theft is pretty bad too, and the Bible speaks against that as well. I don't really know any sect of any religion, really, that says that these kinds of lies and shady behavior were okay. The Bible explicitly states, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." The Bible also says that the wicked borrow and do not repay. And I have no patience for liars and con men. Like, this religious whatever should have been called into question immediately with Butch's catchphrase, "I created your childhood." No, Butch, you didn't. You didn't create anyone's childhood. God did, according to your own beliefs. And don't you believe that taking credit for what God did is blasphemy? I don't know why God would put his mission in a liar, a con man, and a blasphemer. I'd say that Elmer is as religious as Frollo, but Frollo felt shame for what he was doing in going against God. Speaking of shame, it really is a shame. It's not like Butch Hartman didn't have the potential to do good in this world. Or, barring that, to even be a harmless force in this world. Actually, speaking of harm reduction, there is one thing that I do need to bring up that I think has become a problem with people who are criticizing Butch Hartman, and it's something that I do think that we have to talk about. And that's Butch's attitude towards suicide. Like, he gets criticized for this a lot, saying that when he was a kid, suicide was never even thought of, and he blames it on social media. Butch is a moron, by just about every definition. However, I do have to say, in the last decade, youth suicides have had a dramatic increase. Like 60%. Experts aren't sure why, but a lot of them do throw blame on social media. Like, a lot of what Butch says is stupid, and it's not like youth suicide never existed in the past, but it is a growing problem that does need to be addressed. I don't think that Butch or Waxis is going to solve it. I don't think he has any plans to actually stop it, but let's not pretend the issue doesn't exist just because it came out of this man's mouth. It'd be a shame if he turned this real and legitimate problem into a joke through his behavior. One thing that might help with that problem is if the people we looked up to and idolized stopped being shitty people. The names at this point are getting to be just too numerous. It's extremely sad when a guy who believes that you could pray the autism away is one of the lesser evils that Nickelodeon had on board, in between John Kay, Dan Schneider, and Chris Savino. Like, it's getting to a point where it's putting my mind somewhere I don't want it to be. Like, whenever I hear a celebrity or creator is a con artist or a sexual deviant or just a shitty person, it's not shocking anymore. It's just, them too. And it's getting to the point where I'm starting to think that, like, this is the default of what humans are. I don't think I can be shocked by finding out if another creator has been one of the worst anymore. It also makes me even more frustrated that we're digging up graves for canceling people, like with Michael Jackson and Dr. Seuss. I mean, whatever they did in their life, they're not doing it now. They're dead now. And the only thing talking about them in this manner does is make it seem like you're running out of people to complain about. But it turns out that we're not done. This is a topic that I can go on and on with. If you want to hear more of these deeper conversations, do let me know in the comments below. I don't know why, but I always like to have the tougher conversations more than the family-friendly, happy-for-everyone kind of stuff. I like a lot more meaning in my words in my discussions. I like having serious talks. And as for Elmer, like I said, he's going back to Nickelodeon working on the Fairly OddParents, and that's probably where this story is going to end. And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be all demanding some kind of justice, to have him cast out into the wind or something. But in all likelihood, this is definitely some kind of justice. Butch is an egotist. Like, I don't think even his defenders would argue against that. It is undeniable at this point. So, imagine how an egotist would feel if they left their corporate overlords to try and strike it out of their own, doing the most important mission of their lives. They were on a mission from God himself. They get everything that they ask for, and they still failed. They failed so massively they had to return to their corporate overlords. Some people would demand that Nick have nothing to do with Butch from this point onward, but quite honestly, I think it's more poetic if he works on Fairly OddParents for the rest of his life. Because even if the name and the premise of the show changes, he's working on the Fairly OddParents for the rest of his life if he has any creative control on any show, because that's all any show Butch Hartman will ever make will be, another Fairly OddParents clone. Any new character he draws will be in the Fairly OddParents style because he can't draw in any other style. Oh, and Mr. created my childhood. My childhood was shit, but thanks for letting me know who I can blame for that. If critique makes me weak, by the way, what does that make you for never taking it?